Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to the 5, 8.5, your midweek break. I'm Lisa Graves, and I'm here along with Nadine Smith. And so excited for you all to join us tonight. And also wanted to do a shout out to Greg O'Lear and Elby for inviting us to launch this Wednesday night show. And you know the routine, it's 5 stories, 8 minutes. We slow things down to refuel, reflect, and remember. You're not alone, and the glass is half full, but the glass is looking a little shaky right about now.
This week. Yeah. Actually, I had to fill my glass all the way up, and I'm not even going to explain what I'm drinking. But it's it's been a rough week.
Yeah, we can have a guessing game, but let's focus on the saber rattling of potential nuclear annihilation. Not funny.
Yeah, no, it's everything. Words that we used to use as metaphors right now don't feel metaphorical. They feel very, very real, which for me is why these midweek hangouts are important, because it gives us a chance to all sort of clutch our collective pearls together. Mine, yours are not metaphorical. Mine are. But it's an opportunity for us to hang out and talk about it. But it is a scary time, and in scary times, it is important to be in community. So it's great to be here with you and with the rest of the 5, 8.5 crew. And what do you say? It's not going to get lighter from here. We're going to go from talking about the saber rattling and the bombs flying. And it has to be said that we are here in no small part because Trump in his first term could not stand the fact that the accord that kept Iran's nuclear arsenal at bay bore his name. And so he tore it up, swore he'd make a better deal. And here we are, 7 years later, dealing with the fallout from that act of racism and hubris.
Yeah.
And speaking of,
I was going to say, this period I found over the last 8-9 years, these moments where I think we talked about it the other week, where someone says, "Oh, a watch is right, a stopwatch is right twice a day," like when Trump criticizes Leonard Leo, but he's not really right twice a day. It's like a more rare occurrence, but it's also the case that I find myself watching things unfold, like Tucker Carlson questioning Ted Cruz about Iran, and Ted Cruz knowing basically nothing, and somehow rooting for Tucker Carlson to show up Ted Cruz on his ignorance toward Iran, as Cruz, literally says on the air that we're attacking Tehran, and then is corrected by Tucker, who says, "But I thought it was Israel, not us." Isn't that our official position? Is it's not us? And I think that any day in the year that I'm on the same side as Tucker Carlson is just a little bit too surreal for words.
I know that it's unforgivable. I found myself quoting Rand Paul the other day, and I just thought, what is our world coming to?
Yeah, it is. And then we see some things that our world is coming to with the stochastic terrorism that we've been seeing unfold, in part, I think, due to the circumstance that we've seen with Trump. Just a week or two ago, Trump was talking about the possibility that he would pardon the men convicted of trying to kidnap and murder the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. Said he might, thinking about it. And we know that that one of his very first acts as president this time around was to pardon hundreds of people who were convicted either through jury trials or plea agreements of engaging in violence against our Capitol, against the Capitol Police, trying to stop the counting of the votes in the 2020 election. And so, he also pardoned 23 people who had been convicted of violence toward abortion clinics, and individuals, workers at abortion clinics, And so, you know, you have these signals from Trump, even pardoning people who were at the helm of the what I consider to be a domestic terrorist organization, Stuart Rhodes and company,
Right.
who were in substantial terms, and releasing them to the public, into the public, despite their crimes. And so that signals to people who are unstable or people who are not unstable, who have violent,
yeah.
you know, ideation, that they might do something and be able to get away with it.
And I won't even call them unstable. I will call them radicalized. And the message they've been getting has been crystal clear. Not only is your violence acceptable, it's expected. And if you get caught, a pardon is on the table for you. And so it should not shock us when this past week that message was received. We witnessed the shocking act of political violence in Minnesota, where State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband were assassinated in their home by a man dressed up as a police officer, driving a vehicle modeled completely after a police cruiser. Not only did he murder them, he also attempted to murder Democratic State Senator John Hoffman and his wife. And in his vehicle, he had a list of, 70 targets, all Democrats. And before his identity was known, there were Republicans online making all manner of comments because he served on some board that was technically appointed by Walz. But I think all of us knew the profile of this guy because it is the same profile over and over and over again. It is why white radicalized evangelical men are the number one domestic terrorist threat in America. And we have to confront this reality, but this is the inevitable result of the kind of rhetoric we have been hearing. And even in the aftermath of this appalling assassination, what did we get? We did not get a unifying national moment. We did not get grace and grief from the White House. We got some of the most appalling comments by people like Mike Lee. And it is hard to fathom the depths of evil that in the aftermath of something so horrific, what you have is mockery and jokes. And there's Mike Lee should resign. And more than that, he should be driven out of office by his own party if there was a shred of decency in them.
Yeah, it really is. It's extraordinary. There was the official statement from the White House right after shortly after the news conference that Governor Walz and the other law enforcement officials held. That was while Trump was at his, parade. But then, of course, Trump reverted to form shortly afterward and wouldn't call the governor of the state who worked with Melissa Hortman. She was the top-ranking Democrat in the House for the Minnesota legislature, longtime leader, well-respected, well-regarded, bipartisan, a person who was devoted to trying to find common sense solutions across the aisle, and while also defending, the progressive vision that Minnesota has about how committed the people in that state are to community, to neighbors, to neighborliness, to basically helping each other in the face of this rising extremism from the Republican Party. And as you point out, Nadine, it wasn't just the president who then, issued a slur against Walz ridiculously and refused to call him, but there was also Mike Lee and others. And Mike Lee, not only did he try to blame the assassination on Marxism, which is just stupid. Like, it's just literally one of the stupidest things anyone ever wrote on Twitter. And that's actually saying a lot. But then, he then tried to blame it on Walz. He thought it was funny. And I saw someone else did an analysis that conveyed that Mike Lee is on Twitter, posts like 1,000 times or more a month on Twitter. It's like he's addicted to Twitter, and he got millions of views for those hateful tweets and tens of thousands of likes, basically 17,000, 18,000 likes on each of those tweets. Then Sunday, after it's unequivocally clear that this is a MAGA guy, the guy who's been accused, who was pictured on camera with his, mask and his car and all the other things that point directly to him. This guy is a MAGA supporter, that he's anti-choice, he's, vehemently anti-abortion,
anti-trans, anti-LGBT.
Anti. Mike Lee retweets Elon Musk claiming that the left is violent, and retweeting an outrageous claim by an instigator, still blaming the left for these murders, these vile murders. And then Mike Lee on Sunday, after around the time that he posts a Father's Day thing, he posts that's a fact check. This is true, when it was not true. And then it took him another couple of days to take it down. But I don't think he's apologized. And actually, I don't think any apology is adequate. I think he revealed his character in unvarnished form. I think he should resign. He was just reelected by the people of Utah, so he's not up again for a couple of years. But I think that the people of Utah really should remove him from office and banish him from public life. He does not deserve to be serving, in my view, as an elected representative with the just absolutely immoral response he had to what is obviously a moral crisis for this country, to have another assassination, we've had these attempted assassinations. We had an attempted assassination of the Speaker of the House of Virginia a couple of years ago by anti-Semitic guys who, after her, she was the first woman who served in that role, and a Democrat. We had just a few months ago the firebombing of the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania. We have, as you point out, Nadine, an extraordinary amount of violence coming from the right wing, actually from people who are supporters of Donald Trump. And yet we have an administration that appears to be standing down investigations into hate crimes. Any efforts really by the FBI to be involved in a longstanding set of work to deal with the reality in this country, which is that the violence hails predominantly from the right wing in this country, as we saw, on January 6th. But the fact that we did not have a unifying moment, that we don't have a president who has the character to stand up and speak out against this violence on behalf of all of America, is also a tragedy.
Yeah. I mean, part of me says there's something so fundamentally broken in him that it doesn't register what a decent thing to do might be. It's like occasionally you watch him struggle to mimic human emotion of empathy, but mostly he doesn't bother. But I think the thing that is critical for people to understand is that Mike Lee is moving in circles that have normalized the way he's speaking. He is moving in circles where it is very clear that this kind of violence, this is encouraged. They want to see people afraid in public. They want to see people afraid to be in places where they might encounter this kind of violence. And, it is a page out of the authoritarian playbook that you foment this kind of, stochastic violence so that it doesn't have to be done under the color of law. But it can have that same purpose. And that is why, to me, the June 14th is such an important contrast, because you have, even the assassination attempts against Trump, such as they were, when you trace the people responsible, you still end up with white men, radicalized right-wingers, who, for whatever reason, were in the role of I won't go down that road, but we understand that it keeps being a predictable demographic driven by predictable politics. And I think what we saw with Trump commandeering the 250th anniversary of the Army, what should have been a celebration of the Army, and turning it into his own personal birthday parade is an example of, once again, wanting to send this message, as bullies do, of might, of it was a flex, or it was intended to be a flex. And so what I love about the parade was what everybody saw was far from a flex. When you think about that parade, and you might, have in your mind images of, North Korea or the Soviet Union or any place where dictators have these crisply marching, soldiers with this intimidating display of political military might. This was the exact opposite of it. First of all, it was sparsely attended. The soldiers were not marching crisply. And I say this as somebody who, went to the Air Force Academy, went through boot camp, went through basic training, knows how much you are drilled to be able to do that. I guarantee there's not a soldier, a service member in any branch who cannot march crisply. And the fact that they didn't tells us something, whether it is malicious compliance or anger that suddenly, if Father's Day weekend was taken over by this narcissist, or poor planning on the part of a Department of Defense that has been stripped bare of so much of its leadership by Hegseth. All of these things combine to turn it, not only do people think of it as the opposite of a show of strength. The emblematic symbol for that parade was a lone squeaky tank rolling down the street, with a street so empty that you could hear its wheels turn. And so I think that there is something in the contrast between that and the No Kings, millions upon millions of Americans taking to the street for the No Kings protest, the largest, by all accounts, the largest protest in American history. Especially, I think of Minnesota. I think of Minnesota, where people were told, hey, listen, this guy's still on the loose. He's killed popular, beloved Democrats. It is too dangerous to assemble. And they said, you know what? We're going, and you won't stop us. And Minnesota's capital had an amazing turnout. And that is the spirit that we have to have, that we will not back down. We will not be fearful. We will turn our anger and our grief and our rage into action. And I think that the contrast could not have been stronger, especially when we've seen what was unfolding in Los Angeles, the show of force, the bringing in the Marines, everything that was supposed to tell people it isn't worth it. It's too dangerous. Don't go out there.
Yeah. I mean, our service members deserve better than being hailed into this event to prop up Trump's ego. It was also, I think, really visually startling to see the tanks crossing the Memorial Bridge from near Arlington Cemetery. I lived in DC for many, many years, crossing that Memorial Bridge near the Lincoln Memorial in order to parade in front of Trump, who someone seized upon. Oh, the anniversary for the founding of the Army just happens to be on the same day as Trump's birthday, so we'll pretend it's not a birthday celebration, but we'll have it be marking the Army's creation as part of the launch of the American Revolution against King George III. That revolution was against a despot, against a person who was born into a role and acted in defiance of the law. And next year is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which literally talks about the reasons for challenging and opposing King George that included failure to follow the laws that were passed in the colonies, the laws that were passed in England, that he was holding himself out to be above the law. And so the contrast, as you mentioned, between the sparsely attended event. Now, I heard someone blame the corral of how people got to these seats as the reason why they weren't filled with people.
Listen, that parade was so boring. Donald Trump fell asleep.
Yeah.
And it was
yeah, I mean, there's just
miserable.
no way it was 250,000 people. It's just impossible. It's like the original inauguration in terms of like just the empty, the emptiness of it. And I felt bad in a way for the troops that they were parading, had went through all this effort and were parading by these empty seats. But I think that is emblematic. And like you said, in contrast, wow, the inspiration of those no Kings rallies, the amazing creative signs, the joy that people were expressing in standing up for our heritage, our rights, standing up for the rules, for justice. It just could not be more stark. And it was millions and millions. And the tally I heard was that, in fact, this was the greatest number of people who've ever marched in protest, in essence, in U.S. history, happened just this past weekend.
Yeah, and in addition to all of the people marching in the U.S., you had 20 countries where solidarity events were being held as well. So, whether it's 6 million, I've heard somewhere between 6 and 11 million. I would, what we know is Americans turned out, and there's something in this sort of defiant spirit that I just want to lift up. My wife went to a demonstration a couple of weeks ago. So we're living in Florida under sort of Trump squared, because we have Trump and then mini-me DeSantis, who went out of his way to say, we will, don't forget, you can run over protesters with your car, essentially. And, she was talking about at the end of a protest, a lot of the mostly older sort of progressive church women that she was out there with sort of said to each other, see you in El Salvador. And when she was telling me this, I was just like, what? They said that? And I thought about it, but it wasn't so much a mockery of how horrific it was. It was sort of like, my greatest fear is that I can be disappeared, that I can be sent off to some place. So instead of shrinking from this moment and refusing to come to these gatherings, I'm going to tell them, you know what? See you in El Salvador. Like, we're here. We're not going to be intimidated. And I love this defiance in America right now. And I want to keep it going. And speaking of defiance, it is Pride Month. It is Pride Month, which makes it really, Pride is emblematic of defiance. And for people who don't know or don't remember, but Pride is the emblematic commemoration of a night at the Stonewall Inn, a very famous gay bar in New York that was raided time and time again by police for shakedowns and arresting people simply for being gay. And on that particular night in 1969, the patrons fought back. And that moment turned into a multi-day standoff with police. And so Pride is about saying we will no longer hide, we will no longer be in the shadows, and we have a right to exist. And so, Pride Month kicks off in June. And what we have been experiencing these last, under the MAGA regime, is where Pride is now weaponized to launch, whatever hateful thing. So the first day of Pride, they specifically set about to remove Harvey Milk's name from a U.S. naval vessel. The beginning of taking the names of heroes of different communities off of ships. And they said very clearly they timed it purposely. Then you have the Southern Baptist Convention voting to repeal marriage equality, voting to direct resources to end marriage equality as we prepare to celebrate marriage equality in the U.S., also a ruling that came down in June. And then just today, not too many hours ago, we got word of a Supreme Court decision out of a case out of Tennessee that allows the banning of health care for trans youth. It replaces the parents' medical science and the the best care for a child with, that's all out the window. Politicians get to decide, not the parents, not in concert with medical professionals, not what is best for that child. And so I think that is one of the reasons that Pride Month has to still exist, because the fight continues. And I'm going to hand it over to you, because we've got a guest joining us today who can speak specifically to the confluence of events.
That's right. That's right. And, one of the things that also happened today is that the Trump administration announced that they were no longer going to operate a special hotline for LGBTQ youth for suicide prevention. They had sort of an all people matter, all lives matter response. They didn't want it siloed to have a special hotline for gay LGBTQ kids who face basically the highest suicide rate among teens. And they're going to just be part of the whole system of whatever it is they're going to provide or not provide in terms of hotlines. But so we are seeing this sort of unfolding attack on equality and on the most vulnerable people, and in some ways the most brave people who, want to live their lives consistent with, who they are as people. And so I'm really excited to invite to the show, to the first time on the 5-8.5, but not the first time on the 5-8, Alyssa Bowen. I don't call her Dr. Alyssa Bowen because I work with her, but she is Dr. Alyssa Bowen, PhD. And Alyssa is my deputy in my day job at True North Research. And she has spent, a number of years looking into these groups that are behind these wedge issues, driving these culture war issues. And so just want to say hello, Alyssa. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your evening to come on and join Nadine and I here on the 5-8.5. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa and Nadine. Nice to meet you, Nadine, also.
Yeah, wonderful to meet you. Wish we were on a happier topic, but these relentless attacks, and today really has been a collision of hatefulness aimed at, especially at trans youth, but the LGBTQ community as a whole. What's your, what do you see from your vantage point?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, this is just terrific during Pride Month, no less. But as you mentioned, this ruling by the far-right faction of the court, it wasn't surprising, but it is deeply disturbing, and it is potentially deadly to, the 110,000 trans youth who live in states that have already existing bans on gender affirming care. So it's, and as Lisa mentioned also, I mean, these trans youth have extraordinarily high rates of depression and suicide. And I think we're going to see some horrific effects from this ruling that was passed down today.
Yeah, the thing that really strikes me is how just the hubris of these legislatures, like involved in this case, in the Scarametti case, in trying to displace the really significant decisions that parents are making with the doctors that are treating their children and their children's requests and circumstances. And so in this area, like with abortion, you have a willingness of legislatures to displace the family decisions and family medical decisions, like with hormone blockers, for example, for some of these youth. And those legislators aren't in the room. They're not in those houses with those families contending with just the extraordinary rate of depression for people who have that gender dysphoria, who are certain that they are not, like, that their assigned gender at birth is not their gender. But the arrogance of these legislatures and this court, this Roberts court, in affirming that these laws can go forward, they're in effect in more than half the states in terms of intruding on those medical decisions And as you know well from your research over these past several years, the trans issue has been used as a wedge issue. It's used as a way to drive the Republican base. Part of that, has been put forward by Heather Higgins, who is someone sort of very much in the right-wing movement, who helps lead and direct one of these parts of the right-wing infrastructure. She really mapped this out over 5 or 6 years ago, that they really wanted to push hard on assailing trans. And then we saw this last year in the presidential race, where there were more than 200 million, more than $200 million in ad buys that were targeting this issue of trans Americans, even though trans people represent, fewer than 1% of the entire population. But there were ads that were running incessantly in September and October attacking Kamala Harris on the issue of trans rights. And that, I think, was not a decisive thing in this election, but a deliberate effort to have that be more important than other issues that Americans are facing, and also including putting someone back in office who doesn't believe that he's bound by the Constitution. But I wonder if you could share with us some of your thoughts about that, Alyssa, and some of the work that you've done over the years to take a look at where some of these wedge issues are coming from, how they're being driven.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. Well, I'll just say that this case is so emblematic of that. Jonathan Skrmetti, on behalf of the Tennessee Attorney General office, is the one that is bringing the case to defend this ban, this trans youth healthcare ban. And Skrmetti is very tied into the Leonard Leo network. And as you and probably some of your viewers now know, the Independent Women's Forum has been whose board chair is Heather Higgins. They have received millions of dollars from Leo's network, and Skrmetti is well within this network. He's very close allies with Carrie Severino, who helms one of Leo's major hubs, Judicial Crisis Network. He also is a member and used to be on the board of the Republican Attorneys General Association, whose biggest funder is Leo's JCN, which Carrie Severino runs. And we've seen time and time again, like the RAGA AGs are behind a lot of these cases. They coordinate amicus briefs to kind of indicate to the captured court that has been captured with the help of Leonard Leo, the cases that are important to them and their donors, and what they want the case decision to be. So this case is very much part of this court capture operation, and it's disturbing to see that the highest court in our country is sort of beholden to these powers, and that's why, sadly, that this was predictable but still abhorrent.
Yeah, and I want to jump in quickly, Nadine, but the things that struck me when I first encountered RAGA back when I was the chief counsel for nominations for the Senate Judiciary Committee, because we had a whistleblower who gave us the call sheets of these Republican attorneys general who were operating within the Republican State Leadership Committee, RSLC, and they were basically dialing for dollars from corporations that were regulated by those states, which those attorneys general themselves, for their own personal political campaigns, could not get money from. But they were getting money to RAGA that then was spending money to help them get reelected. But what we discovered when RAGA became a separate entity from RSLC over the past 10 years was that Leonard Leo and his operation is by far the biggest funder of RAGA, bigger than Koch Industries or the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So he has extraordinary influence over these attorneys general. This is a lever of power that he's targeted, just like he's targeted capture of the U.S. Supreme Court, and he's targeted capture of state Supreme Courts and more. And so we really do have in this area some substantial distortion of public policy happening at the behest of a small number of individuals who have a lot of power. Leonard Leo has billion trust fund at his disposal. Heather Higgins is the heir to the Vicks Vapor Rub fortune. That's where her family made their money, hawking Vicks Vapor Rub as a cure for the Spanish flu. It was not, but they got super rich in that process. And so it's not that there aren't real issues that the medical community is contending with in terms of how do we help these kids, or how do we help adults transition, if that's their wish, that's their determination. But those decisions are decisions for medical experts and families and people to make those, not for ideologues who are just trying to drive a political wedge. But I interrupted you, Nadine. Please jump in.
No, listen, I co-sign everything you just said. And I do want to underscore this, because we can trace back to the moment that suddenly every Republican could talk about nothing but transgender people. In fact, it is a tell. In Florida, if you start to see a lawmaker go on a rant about trans folks, just know charges are about to drop. Some scandal is about to burst forth onto the scene. And not only that, we always have to remember how these things are interconnected. Like, yes, they do intend to go after marriage equality, and they intend to use the same strategy they used to go after abortion. The reason that transgender people became the target is because marriage equality stopped being an effective wedge issue, and they had to find something else. And the American Principles Project, basically said in the New York Times, we threw everything against the wall, and to our surprise, what stuck was that Americans didn't know much about the transgender community, and we knew we could work with that. By which he meant we knew we could take ignorance and turn it into fear and weaponize that fear for votes. And so they have put tons of resources into, out of thin air, creating this attack. So as much as you may be upset that you were earlier agreeing with Tucker Carlson, I find myself using Chris Christie's talking points on this, because I think he was one of the presidential candidates that got it right. He said, listen, whatever journey a family is on when it comes to having a kid who is transgender, I imagine that's quite, it is a deeply personal journey for that family. And I'm not a doctor, and you're not a doctor. No one's going to love that kid more than their parents. I don't know what decision they should make, but I know that that decision shouldn't be mine, and it shouldn't be the state legislatures, and it shouldn't be the governors. And it's really that simple. Every major U.S. medical and mental health association, from the American Academy of Pediatrics to the American Medical Association, supports providing care for these kids. This care involves extensive evaluation, counseling, close oversight by qualified professionals, with families and doctors making those decisions based on what is best for that child. And this is peer-reviewed studies. And the regret rate is minor. More people will regret their MAGA tattoos than will regret, gender-affirming care. And so all of these things, we do talk about suicide rate, but it's both things. When you meet somebody who has gone through the process of transitioning, is able to live as themselves, the light in their eyes, the joy, the end of a life of depression, they deserve to live fully. And the fact that it is cynical and cruel politics, not what is in the best interest of that child and that family, it's infuriating. And but I hold out this hope. I hold out the hope that they are forcing people to have these conversations, and that we are getting closer and closer to a place where people can go from ignorance to understanding. That's my hope.
Yeah. Well said, Nadine. Well, Alyssa, you're welcome to stay on for the next two segments if you want, or you're also welcome to head back to the family and all the other things you have going on in your life. We're so thrilled that you came on to share your expertise. And it's just a joy for me to see you. I see you in our work life, obviously, but it's always a joy to see you being interviewed, because I just so appreciate your great heart and great mind, Alyssa. And thank you so much for joining us.
Both, yes. I'll listen in. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Well, so now
nice. I get to meet
Yeah.
I get to meet your team. That's fantastic.
She's amazing. Yeah, I've got an amazing team. They're really good-hearted, great people who care so much about these issues, even in the midst of, the battles that we're seeing. And, one of the battles we're seeing is this unfolding violence by ICE agents, often in masks. And now I don't know what number we're up to, but we're certainly up to at least it seems like a half a dozen elected officials who have been, wrestled to the ground or, brutalized in various ways. Not as brutalized as George Floyd was a few years ago, but manhandled for being in public spaces or daring to ask a question, like with Alex Padilla. But we're seeing this real aggressiveness by ICE agents toward Democratic officials who dare to ask questions about what's going on. And obviously we've seen other things unfolding in terms of the raids and the way that students have been targeted for exercising their First Amendment rights. We've been hearing reports about how Stephen Miller, that monstrous man who grew up in Southern California as a kind of guy who just hated the libs or whatever, and was taken under the wing of David Horowitz, one of the major propagandists of the right, who passed away in recent years with a pretty good wealthy fortune, having gotten pretty rich on his propaganda campaigns. But Stephen Miller, who was really cultivated by the right, embraced by Trump in the first administration, now has another post in this administration where he reportedly went into a room with officials from DHS and demanded that they do more, arrest more people, drum up more numbers, get the numbers, because it's a lie. What the American people have been told about the crisis and immigration, the notion that our streets are filled with criminal, violent aliens, it's a lie. There aren't that many people that they can arrest who have not already been arrested. The small minority of people who engage in criminal activity, who are citizens or not citizens, once they finish their sentence, if they're not a citizen, they are deported from this country, transferred out of this country or transferred into a facility if they are from one of the rare countries that we don't have diplomatic relations with and can't return them. And so because they can't actually deport 20 million people, supposed violent criminals. They're going after other people, about people who are, washing dishes and working at hotels, cleaning hotel rooms, and nannies going to a park in Los Angeles and separating the nannies from the kids that they're watching, putting the kids in custody. They're assailing American citizens who have their identification with them, discounting their identities, official identification. So we have this extraordinary aggressiveness by a police-like force that actually has not been trained in police-like requirements, probable cause, a warrant. And that's not to say that all police follow those rules, but at least there's a set of rules that they're supposed to be following before they seize someone. And now we have ICE roving in ways beyond the sort of raids we saw in the first Trump administration or even the raids under Obama or Biden. We have this very aggressive use of force and then moving people into facilities and then moving them around the country so that they're away from their family and lawyers, so they're in different jurisdictions to try to jurisdiction shop, judge shop to get to the right court to try to keep them from exercising their rights. We have this whole thing unfolding by Trump, in part at the instigation of Stephen Miller whispering in his ear and, driving this wedge issue like, 21st century Roy Cohn. And I am shocked by the treatment of people in general, but also of elected officials. Not that they're entitled to more rights than ordinary people, but just the aggressiveness, the arrogance that their treatment shows or demonstrates from this administration. I don't know. What do you think, Nadine?
Yeah. I was going to say that's the intended response of seeing a senator taken to the ground to seeing charges being brought against duly elected Democratic officials is to say, if they're not protected, surely I cannot step into that space. One of the things that we learned early was if an American citizen was present when somebody who was here going through the legal process, when they got to court, they were less likely to disappear that person if an American citizen was with them. So the comptroller in New York was for weeks going to court with immigrants for the purpose of making sure that, they weren't alone and they weren't simply going to be snatched up. And so to purposely have him grabbed up by someone in full face mask, no identity. He was saying, I will get out of your way when you show me the warrant. You have to have a warrant. You can't just grab people up. And they ignored him, wrenched the man away from him, and arrested him. These are the most basic rights that we have. And so to the degree that we have normalized, or they have normalized, that people without warrants who are completely unidentifiable, who refuse to identify themselves or show that they have any legal authority to snatch people up, and those people cannot be found until they've been shipped off to El Salvador in a way that the administration then says, hey, we can't get them back even if we wanted to. Like, all of this is intentional. They went after mayors and Congress members who are supposed to be able to have surprise inspections of these facilities. They're being turned away at the door. All of it is about making us fearful, giving the illusion that the rules need not apply any longer to them. And so it is even more important. Every time they take one Democrat to the ground, every single Congress member should insist on replacing them. We cannot allow them to believe that this is going to have the effect they intend it to, which is pure intimidation. I'm glad to see places like California are now banning full face masks for law enforcement. We need more of that. I've heard, and I've got to track this down, and if anybody in the comments can track this down, I've been hearing that part of it is that these are bounty hunters who have been deputized to function as ICE, which makes sense if you understand how bounty hunters operate. That seems to track to me that is really quite possible, and they do not follow the rules of engagement that law enforcement are supposed to they are supposed to. But here's another piece of this: we should be following the money as well, because this desire to fill some quota, this desire to create a market for these kind of, Eric Prince-like mercenaries that feel as though they can operate outside the bounds of law, and people having to figure out, my husband was taken, my brother was taken, my friend, my neighbor, taken where, and who's profiting from it. In Florida, the governor likes to beat his chest and send Florida money to other states, to Texas, to fly immigrants to Martha's Vineyard. That was one of his big, campaign stunts. But somebody got paid for that flight, right? And people are getting money behind every action that they take. And we really have to start talking about who's making money off of this level of cruelty.
Yeah, I'm totally about following the money. That's something I've been doing for a long time. And I just posted in the chat one of our early reports from about a decade ago on lockup quotas, which was that particular report was about how outsourcing of state prison contracts was basically meaning that these for-profit firms like Geo Group and other groups were getting money based on basically a better non-vacancy rate than a hotel. They get paid by, how many people are locked up. And you can kind of see that happening in its own way with some of the reports we've seen about like the Canadian woman who was seized coming in to change her visa status at the border, the southern border, and then she was kept in facilities for, I think, almost 2 weeks before she was able to be released. And sort of no one had authority to release her because, like, it was basically, it seemed to be in the interests of the profit makers, basically, to keep her, to like count her as a bed that was filled. And we have seen through the work that I've done about the American Legislative Exchange Council, through this project I spearheaded with colleagues from Labor and Common Cause and other groups called ALEC Exposed, we saw that at an ALEC meeting, this is a pay-to-play group that Charles Koch and Leonard Leo now fund. Koch was funding it way back then. Way back when, that SB 1070 bill in Arizona, when that was adopted, it was built on a measure that was initially approved in 2010 at an ALEC meeting, a closed-door meeting, and one of the biggest private prison firms in the country was in the room for that vote. They claim they didn't vote. I always used to say it was like Santa Claus. They get to see whether you're naughty or nice if they voted or not, because they were going to profit from SB 1070, which was designed to seize immigrants, from workplaces and lock them up, and that company was going to get richer. In fact, had done some, I think, marketing calls or something about it, but like was going to get richer based on SB 1070. Ultimately, that company left ALEC after that was revealed. The fact that it was in the room when the precursor to SB 1070 was adopted. But the fact is that this is still a problem. To have incentives to seize people and keep people that are financial incentives, that are not based on strict adherence to the law, that are not based on actually the long-standing discretion under our immigration law that people have had who have been in positions of enforcement to determine, for example, for administrative law judges, immigration judges, to take into account a person's circumstances, their ties to the community, their history of being involved in the Little League and their kids, their U.S. citizen children, like to have some humane discretion in our law to deal with the reality of people's lives, and instead have, pirateers or privateers or, pirates, bounty men, people who are seizing people and perhaps getting, and facilities that are private facilities that are being expanded in order to hold people and get rich on it. It's, I think, fundamentally immoral. And then there's the fundamentally immoral component that is Eric Prince and his desire to be part of building, temporary tent facilities to house people. Like, these are not measures that I think are consistent with America at its best. I don't think people should be held in for-profit facilities. I fundamentally oppose that at every level, local, state, federal, immigration, criminal, whatever, because I think it creates the wrong incentives in terms of our due process rights and humane treatment.
Well, I mean, listen, when we talk about follow the money, Palantir getting huge government contracts, look at their stock performance, and you will see just how lucrative this machinery of identifying every immigrant. They're not just, they're identifying, they know everything about us. They know what websites you've been to. They've tracked all of your social media posts. But we also have, you mentioned the GEO Group. They've secured, I think, a 15-year, $1 billion deal to operate a 1,000-bed ICE detention center in New Jersey. It's currently the largest on the East Coast. They're also reopening or planning contracts for 1,800-bed site in Michigan. They also have a deal to review a major expansion in Georgia. And then you have Core Civic, which is reopening like several huge facilities under emergency no-bid contracts, right? So this is Southern Texas, in Dilley, Texas, 2,400 beds. They have invested that money and they're going to get their money back, and they're going to meet those quotas, and Stephen Miller is going to lash them until they do. This is why they are going to courthouses, people who are following the law, checking in the way they're supposed to, because that's where you're going to find people. They know for sure the people who are doing it the right way. So yes, we cannot ignore the financial incentive, and these no-bid emergency contracts, just like efforts to invoke war powers, emerge from that same place. Like, is the moment you can say, hey, it's an emergency, they are able to give tons of money. There's a bunch of different companies that no one will know, because they never had to bid, they never have to disclose, and they're making money hand over fist. So it's really, really appalling. I do want to segue us though, because as we talk about this policy, the incoherent Trump policy, we have to look at how he's all over the map. I mean, quite literally, Mike Lee can say what he says in the aftermath of these assassinations because they have come to believe that the big lie will win every time. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, no matter what they say, no matter how absurd, outrageous, over the top it is. If they say it long enough, if they repeat it, if Elon Musk echoes it, then it becomes true enough that there are still people, despite all of the evidence, his best friends saying, yeah, he's a big Trump supporter, so am I. This is the evangelical group he's a part of. This is the ministry that he is a part of. This is his hatred for Democrats and all of this, the big lie. And so it has been fascinating to see Trump try to talk out of both sides of his mouth on immigration. This past week, he suddenly had the revelation out of nowhere that immigrants are actually law-abiding, tax-paying, essential components of our economy that put food on our tables every night. And he, was like, yeah, I've heard from some people that, these immigrants, they're really good folks and they've been working in places for 20 years and they are really important. And so we're going to stop raiding farms and we're going to stop raiding hotels and we're going to stop raiding, what else did he say? Restaurants, and we're going to let people, who are good people continue to do their work. Because if we chase them out, then they'll be replaced by the bad immigrants that Biden let in. I mean, the contortions to try to make their incoherent immigration policy make sense is astonishing. And what I can only imagine is actually happening is a lot of people, there's a video clip going around of Latinos for Trump, where this woman is singing the Trump song, and dancing with a Trump flag. And then you cut to today. First, her husband was deported, and now she's in the process of being deported and is sobbing. It feels as though there have been a lot of people who got behind Donald Trump who are going, I never thought, the leopard would eat my face. I never thought ICE would come into my business and, run into my fields and take my workers. And, somebody, I imagine, I don't know this for sure, but I imagine somebody's calling every day on Trump properties and saying that there are immigrants working there and calling for raids, and that whenever he begins to identify where they won't be raiding anymore because it's devastating to those industries, if you're an investor, go ahead, start investing in those kinds of properties, because it's always going to be about the grift. It's always going to be about the money, and it's always going to be about the shakedown. Tariffs are about shaking down countries. These ICE raids are about shaking down businesses. You want me to back off your hotels? You know how this works. You want me to back off your farm? You know how this works. So it is I just want to remind us that even when things seem like they don't make any sense, follow the money and you begin to see the thread that ties together everything that they do.
Well, yeah, and you have the corollary of that, which is these threats against blue states and blue cities. We had the lumberjack just within the last 24 hours. My favorite lumberjack in the federal government. Saying that any city or any state that has sanctuary cities that isn't 100% cooperating with whatever ICE demands, they're not going to get any infrastructure money. So you have this other part of the money shakedown and the reward of, if you help us with our scheme, then you'll get the money that has been allocated by Congress for all states and Americans who live across the country, regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republicans. And instead you have that everything being part of a transaction, part of a way to squeeze compliance with, these dictates and target states that voted Democrat, that have a majority of Democrats, in order to try to deny people access to benefits or infrastructure support that every American should have access to, regardless of whether they voted for Trump or not, or whether they live in a city that supports Trump's raids or not. And so that's the other part of that following the money, is that component. And you have a Supreme Court that, with Roberts at the helm, that is, intervening in some of these ways, like, in one instance saying, look, you've got to follow due process, which, shouldn't be it's a good thing, but it shouldn't be so rare to have like that happen, given this court's right-wing bent and the way that John Roberts paved the way for Trump's return to power. But you have other immigrations that are going to come to this court, and this court, may well rule in favor of the Trump administration on some of these policies, because immigration law has become, more and more restrictive over time, in part because we don't have adults at the table in both parties willing to deal with the reality of migration patterns and people who are courageously fleeing horrific circumstances and instability in their countries to come to the United States. This idea of rolling back temporary protected status, which is only temporary protected status because it's neither asylum, nor a visa like an H-1B visa. It's like this other category for people that we've invited to come in the United States to protect them from the circumstances in their home country. And that protection has lasted for years, decades in some instances. And people in that time have married American spouses, citizens, have citizen children, have contributed to their communities, worked, the whole 9 yards. And so on the one hand, like you said, you have Trump sort of recognizing that in some ways, and then in other ways dictating these really destructive policies that destroy families and communities. And so we are in an ongoing crisis, but it was interesting. And I'm so glad you pointed it out, Nadine, that, there was this sort of pivot in some way around this recognition that immigrants contribute to our communities, because indeed they do.
Absolutely. And, I am heartened by the stories of people standing up for, their favorite waitress, their neighbor, people who aren't particularly, motivated by a political ideology, but this is my community. This isn't right. And we've begun seeing those stories, and we talked about that last week. But I think, as we end each of our shows with a segment that we call the glass half full. Again, it's not to ignore all of what's broken, but just to remind ourselves of what is still beautiful and what is still possible. So this time I want to talk about, as our glass half full, the aftermath of No Kings. Like, here we are, the momentum that has been built by this incredible historic turnout during the No Kings protest. Organizers are already planning the next wave of action. And on July 17th, it is going to be in honor of the legacy of Congressman John Lewis, a nationwide day of peaceful resistance called Good Trouble Lives On. So this isn't just a hashtag, it's about organizing teach-ins, voter registration drives, marches, mutual aid events. Mutual aid is, I think about that when I talk about these neighbors who came together to make sure that, the woman who ran the local diner wasn't disappeared into that process. So these mutual aid events, anything that brings people together and reminds us that democracy isn't just a value, it is a practice. So 5 years after we lost John Lewis, his message is more urgent than ever. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise in getting good trouble, necessary trouble. So July 17th, be on the lookout. Let's all show up. Let's all speak out. And let's make sure that good trouble lives on. And so this week we raise our glass to John Lewis, good trouble, and the momentum from No Kings. And with that,